special speaker, Zainal Anwar, on stage to give a presentation titled Empowered Women. Zainal Anwar co-founded two groundbreaking women's rights groups that engage with Islam from a rights perspective to promote the rights of women living in Muslim contexts. She led Sisters in Islam in Malaysia as its founding executive director from 1999 to 2008. And she is currently the founding executive director of Musawa, the global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family, launched in Kuala Lumpur in 2009. Zainal has won a number of awards, and she has been named by Newsweek and the Daily Beast as one of the 150 women who shake the world, by Women Deliver as one of the 100 most inspiring people in championing the rights of women and girls, and was cited by Huffington Post as one of the 10 leading Muslim women at the global level. Ladies and gentlemen, can I just say, if you want to get a question onto Zainal, you do see all our volunteers and their cards and pencils. Write them, and they will come and deliver to me. On to you, Zainal.
For that kind introduction, Joanne. Good afternoon, everyone. This is really an amazing opportunity for me to share the work of the groups that I have founded in the past 10 to 30 years with all of you here. Women's groups that are working on women's rights in Islam, living in very conservative and challenging Muslim contexts, and sharing this work to a very important international audience of very powerful women. Ladies and gentlemen, my work over the past 30 years really has centered over the struggle for equality and justice for women living in Muslim contexts. One of the most profound challenges we as Muslims face today is the search for ways to live our faith in a world where human rights, women's rights, and democracy constitute the dominant ethical paradigm of the modern world. In the 21st century, there cannot be justice without equality. It is as simple as that. As someone who believes that God is just, that Islam is just, I am outraged that so much injustice, cruelty, and violence are perpetrated in the name of Islam. I will not go into the long, depressing list of outrageous acts against women and children, as we are all too familiar with them. The pushback against women's rights and human rights is also taking place in many conservative states in the West. In the midst of this highly politically charged environment, women's groups are building global solidarity to uphold the universality and indivisibility of rights. Since you are gathered here this weekend in a Muslim country that gave birth to a groundbreaking women's rights movement, I want to share with you today the courage and the will of Muslim women who are taking the lead to define how religion is understood and practiced, and who are demanding that our experience of living Islam and being impacted by laws and policies made in the name of Islam give us the right and the authority to decide and shape what Islam means and should mean in our daily lives and as a source of law and public policy in our countries. Because women have borne the brunt of this discrimination and injustice in the name of religion, in many parts of the Muslim world today, we find women organized and at the forefront of our societies, pushing for change in the understanding and practice of our religion, to recognize equality and justice, and to push for law reform to uphold these principles. But of course, bringing change is never easy. We all know that. Those who hold power, authority, and privilege have benefited from the status quo are resistant to change and use all kinds of tactics to demonize and delegitimize the voice of change. But the reality is, women's lives throughout the world have changed. Our lives, our needs, our roles and status have changed. I don't need to provide the litany of data as well to show this transformation, and how having women on boards and management positions actually increase productivity, efficiency, and profit margins. How in reality today, women are both protectors and providers of their families. That most families, except the most privileged, cannot survive on a single income in this capitalist world we live in today. We have no problems embracing new technology, embracing advancement in science and medicine. But when it comes to recognizing women as human beings of equal worth and dignity, embracing women's demands for equality and justice in the context of changing realities on the ground, suddenly there is so much resistance. The man is the head of the household. He has a right to marry a child. He has a right to beat his wife. He has a right to divorce his wife at will. He has a right to demand obedience. He has a right to 4 wives. He has a right to double the share of inheritance, never mind if he has failed to provide and protect his family. Suddenly we are told all these values that have caused so much harm to women and children and family well-being are the word of God, and therefore cannot be questioned, let alone be challenged or changed. For many of us who have decided to engage with religion to fight for our rights, it is our utter faith in a just God and a just Islam that have made us embark on this perilous but compelling public struggle to push for an understanding of Islam that upholds equality and justice and that recognizes the urgent necessity that we, Muslim women, be treated as human beings of equal worth and dignity. To some people, this is such a radical notion. To us, it is common humanity. We believe the principles and ideals of equality and justice are intrinsic in the Quran, the revealed text of Islam. There is in the Quran an ethical vision of Islam which advocates the absolute moral and spiritual equality of women and men. Several verses in the Quran talk about common and identical spiritual and moral obligations placed on all individuals regardless of sex, which declares that men and women are members one of another, which describes Muslim men and women as each other's garments, which talks about them being each other's guardian and friend, and the obligations for both men and women to enjoin what is just and forbid what is evil, and they will both be equally rewarded. These verses in the Quran are unequivocally egalitarian in spirit and substance, and reflect the Quranic view on the relationship between men and women. These are values upheld in universal human rights principles that regard all human beings as equal. What could be more Islamic than the first article of the UN Declaration on Human Rights, which states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. If we are equal in the eyes of God, why are we not equal in the eyes of men? This is the huge challenge. Thank you. This is the huge challenge we face today. How do we, as Muslims, reconcile the tenets of our faith to the challenge of modernity, of plurality, of changing times and circumstances? Can the teachings of Islam be reconciled with the realities and aspirations of living in the 21st century? For us who identify ourselves as Muslims and as feminists, this is, of course, a resounding yes. I want to draw your attention to the work of Musawa, which means equality in Arabic, and Sisters in Islam, the Malaysian NGO that gave birth to Musawa, and the incredible effort of these activists and scholars who have been engaged in the production of new feminist and rights-based knowledge in Islam, and in creating a public voice and a public space at the national and international levels pushing for the possibility and necessity of reform of Muslim laws and practices to uphold the principles of equality and justice. What we have been doing over the decades is to bridge the seeming divide between Islam and human rights, between Islam and women's rights, and break that constructed binary, as if all the forces of evil are on one side and the forces of good on the other. It is this voice that is reconciling religion and rights, that is challenging the intolerance, misogyny, and conservatism that dominates much of what constitutes authority in the Muslim world, and therefore the ways Islam is understood and practiced today, that is speaking out. It is led by Muslim women activists working closely with scholars, advocating a review and critical reinterpretation of the exegetical and jurisprudential texts and traditions within Islam. This work places emphasis on how religion is understood, how religious knowledge is produced, and how rights are constructed in the Islamic legal tradition and how they can be reconstructed. It locates the production of religious knowledge in the socio-historical context of its time and asserts, given changing times and circumstances, new religious knowledge needs to be produced to deal with new challenges and questions and issues that the tradition had not dealt with. What makes this work exciting, and I've been doing this for 30 years, is that it is not just done at the theological level, but it is cutting-edge work at the intersection of theology, law, politics, and gender. This is absolutely critical work in Muslim context, not just because we believe in a just God and a just Islam, but because we live in countries where Islam is used as a source of law and public policy and practice, and often in ways that discriminate against women, and how Islam is used to justify the resistance to change, or rather abused to justify resistance to change. There is growing realization worldwide today that we need to break the monopoly and hegemony that those in authority have on matters of religion, and that we as citizens affected by laws and policies made in the name of Islam have the right to speak out, to challenge, and to derive new meanings, and to ensure the values of equality and justice and compassion in our religion, the guarantees of equality and non-discrimination in our constitutions, the human rights treaties and standards that our governments have ratified, and our lived realities today are reflected in how Islam is understood and how it is used as a source of law and public policy. The group I co-founded in Malaysia, Sisters in Islam, has since 1988, a long time ago before Islam became fashionable worldwide, engaged with creating a public space and a public tradition of debate on matters related to religion. We take a position that in a country where Islam is used as a source of law, every citizen has the right to participate in how religion is understood and used to make laws and policies to govern our lives. We conduct regular study sessions and trainings to build knowledge on a rights-based understanding of Islam that upholds equality and justice. We write letters to the editor, issue press statements, and embark on campaigns to challenge laws, policies, and statements that use Islam to justify discrimination against women. We run a legal clinic that deals with over 800 cases a year, providing women with gender-sensitive legal advice to enable them to access their rights under the Islamic family law. What we have achieved over the years to break the stranglehold and hegemony over matters of religion in a society where traditionally we have been brought up to believe that only the ulama, the religious leaders, and men at that, have the right to speak on Islam. We take the position that if a state wants to rule in the name of Islam, then the impact of those laws, policies, and practices must be open to public scrutiny and pass the test of public reason. The pioneering work of Sisters in Islam in Malaysia has had a global impact. In 2007, we led the initiative to form Musawa, the global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family. Given the frustrations and opposition Muslim women activists face in trying to push for reform of discriminatory Muslim family laws and the issue of women's rights in Islam, We felt it was high time that all of us who for decades have struggled against patriarchs in government, society, and our private lives come together and create a very collective international public voice demanding our right to equality and justice. First, Musawa, which means equality in Arabic, was launched in February 2009 in Kuala Lumpur with over 200 participants from 47 countries, including 32 member countries of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. What Musawa brings to the larger women's rights and human rights movement and the Muslim world is this: an assertion that Islam can be a source of empowerment, not a source of oppression and discrimination. An effort to open new horizons for rethinking the relationship between Islam and human rights, equality, and justice. An offer to open a new constructive dialogue where religion is no longer an obstacle to equality for women, but a source for liberation. A collective strength of conviction and courage to stop governments and patriarchal authorities and ideological non-state actors from the convenience of using religion and the word of God to silence our demands for equality. And a space where activists, scholars, decision makers working within the human rights or the Islamic framework or both like us can interact and mutually strengthen our common pursuit for equality and justice for Muslim women. Since 2009, Musawa has gained an international recognition for its groundbreaking work in knowledge building, capacity building, and international advocacy. It challenges patriarchal understandings of Islam from within the Islamic tradition. It links scholarship with activism to bring new perspectives on Islamic teachings, inserting women's voices and concerns into the production of religious knowledge and legal reform in Muslim contexts. It uses a holistic framework, the Musawa Framework for Action, that integrates Islamic teachings, universal human rights standards, contemporary state constitutions and laws, and the lived realities of women and men to argue for the possibility of reform towards equality and justice. Our last knowledge-building project on the issue of Qiwama and Wilaya, twin concepts in the Islamic legal tradition that mandate male authority over women, has produced a groundbreaking publication, Men in Charge, ? Rethinking Authority in Muslim Legal Tradition. This book has received raving reviews from major Islamic scholars, and within a year of its publication, at least 22 universities in 7 countries, including the US, Canada, UK, Morocco, Jordan, Qatar, are using this book in Islamic studies and law courses. The book has been translated into Arabic and gaining public attention in the Arab world. Musawa also works in two other key areas, capacity building and international advocacy. Our 7-day short course called Islam and Gender Equality and Justice exposes women's rights activists to how knowledge is produced in the Islamic tradition. The course is aimed largely at women's rights and human rights activists and policymakers who already understand gender and human rights, but have little understanding of Islam from a rights perspective. The only Islam they know is the patriarchal Islam they grew up with, and on the basis of this, many of them have rejected the possibility of engagement with the religion as a source of reform and empowerment within their own societies. But of course, religion has not gone away in their lives or in their society. Thus, the growing demand for the course. Participants learn how the Quran is interpreted, how hadith, the Prophet's traditions, are transmitted, how fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, is constructed, all within a social context. It is not the divine word of God. And explore the possibilities of constructing new understandings to deal with changing times and circumstances. They then develop action plans on strategies for change to build a voice and a culture of public debate on matters of religion. I've just returned from Dubai last week, where we trained 26 Afghan women's rights activists, academics, and a judge, contributing to building their knowledge and courage, because that's what they need, on Islam and women's rights, in the face of fears and anxieties during the current ongoing peace process with the Taliban, where they all fear that the 18 years of gains they have made will be rolled back as their government and the US government push for a peace treaty in order for the US to be able to withdraw their troops from Afghanistan. So there is such pressure and such anxiety, and the training that we give to many participants, including the Afghan women, is life-transforming. That it is possible to be feminist and Muslim and renews their faith in the possibility that Islam can be just to women like them. In the area of international advocacy, Musawa is engaged deeply with the CEDAW process, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We did a major research on Islam and Muslim family laws, critically examining how governments from major Muslim countries use Islam to justify reservations and their non-compliance with treaty obligations. We critique their approach and offer the Musawa framework for action to argue for the possibility of reform. Our interventions in the CEDAW process have led to changes in language and concepts used by the CEDAW experts in the constructive engagement process with governments. Governments that declare they cannot change their discriminatory personal status law because they are God's laws and therefore divine are told and challenged by the CEDAW committee members that this cannot be possibly be so, pointing out to the diversity of laws in Muslim countries that provide for better rights and protection for women, all on the basis of Islam. Why does Tunisia ban polygamy? Why do Saudi Arabia, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon allow a woman to include her marriage contract that the husband cannot take another wife? And if he breaches this term, she is entitled to a divorce. Why does Morocco have equal and minimum age of marriage for both boys and girls at 18? Why do Pakistan, Bangladesh, Morocco, Tunisia not require a woman to have a wali, a male guardian, in order to get married? Why do Turkey and Tunisia recognize the mother equal right to guardianship of her children? The issue indeed in the end is not that there cannot be reform in Islam, that there cannot be equality and justice. The issue is whether governments and those in religious authority have the political will to end discrimination against women. The arguments for reform are there. Within Islam, within our constitution, constitutional guarantees of equality and non-discrimination on the basis of gender, within the human rights principles and that our government subscribe to, and not least in the realities of women's lives today, and what it means to build and sustain the well-being of the family, all members of the family, not just one. This year, Musawa celebrates its 10th anniversary. As we enter the next phase of our growth, we're embarking on exciting new projects. In our knowledge-building area of work, we are starting a research initiative to develop new ethics and jurisprudence of marriage in Islam, bringing together academics and activists and collaborating with 3 universities in Britain, Canada, and Finland. In the area of capacity building, we're raising funds to conduct an annual global institute, offering our 7-day course on Islam and gender equality and justice annually in Kuala Lumpur to meet the growing global demand. In the area of international advocacy, we're launching a global campaign on reform of Muslim family laws to build global momentum and support for the urgent necessity of reform. We're also engaged with UN Women and other international NGOs to turn our campaign into a truly global one on all family laws, not just Muslim family law. Family laws and practices in many parts of the world where patriarchal manifestations of religion, culture, and tradition prevail still to this day discriminate against women. 2020, and I hope Sir Optimus International will be a part of this momentous year. 2020 will be a momentous year for gender equality as the international system celebrates Beijing +25 and SDG +5. We plan to build support among governments and civil society actors to recognize the urgent need to end discrimination against women in family laws and practices. Research shows that discrimination in family law is the strongest single predictor of women's inequality in public life and in economic rights. The 2015 McKinsey Global Institute report on the power of parity identified formal legal equality as a critical first step to closing the gap between women and men in the economy. UN Women's Equality in Law for Women and Girls by 2030 identified promoting equality in family relations as one of the 6 areas of focus to accelerate action towards gender equality. In its 2019-2020 flagship report on progress of the world's women, which is focused on families in a changing world, the top recommendation made by UN Women is the need to establish family laws that recognize diversity and promote equality and non-discrimination. Research findings are clear. Gender equality is good for the family, for society, for the economy, for a country's well-being and prosperity. Yet, many governments and religious and community leaders are still opposed to the demands for change by invoking religious and cultural arguments. It is power, privilege, and authority of some people that are under threat, not religion, culture, or tradition. What is needed now is political will and political courage for reform in an area of law that has entrenched male power and privilege within the most important social unit in society. That power to decide who gets what, who does what, who decides what, and who sets the agenda, and the ideology that sustains this power structure that breeds discrimination and injustice must be dismantled. In the context of my struggle in the Muslim world, women's rights activists are killed, imprisoned, demonized as threats to the sanctity of Islam. However, more and more women are standing up and speaking out as the disconnect between a destructive patriarchal ideology justified in the name of religion and the realities of our lives today can no longer be sustained. In spite of risks to our lives and liberty, Muslim women today are asserting that if Islam is to be used as a source of law and public policy, then everyone has a right to speak out on how the religion is understood, practiced, and codified into laws. Our experience of living Islam in Muslim context give us the authority and the right to speak out, to shape, define, and influence what it means to be Muslim in the 21st century. I would like to urge all of you to visit the websites of Musawa and Sisters in Islam, and to be proud of how far scholarship and activism on women's rights in Islam have progressed in our world, and to take action to be a part of this growing global movement that is today a source of hope for Muslims, for those of us who are determined and proud to be Muslim and feminists. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Zaina.
Thank you.
Ladies, we're just going to spend the next 10 minutes just running through all the questions that I've received. And the common thread in all these questions is that how can we, Seroptimists, be the game changer? How do we force our governments to listen, to raise our rights of our Muslim girls and women? For example, delegates from Sri Lanka is asking, how can we stop our young girls being married off at the age of 14? How then do we change? Are we able to change the Fatwa Acta? That's one of the things. And even the rights of the first woman in marriage. Maybe a little bit of advice from you, Zaina. How can we be the game changer?
Well, I think the Seroptimists can play a significant role in the events running up to Beijing Plus 25. We're going to launch a global campaign for family law reform with the support of UN Women and other international NGOs. And it is very important to get as many groups and organizations, especially international organizations, engage with this, so that this is not seen as a radical voice of a radical fringe feminist, that women who are part of the mainstream, women who are professionals, who are not regarded as radicals, are a part of the demand for equality, for justice, for reform of family laws. So this is going to be a very important event. We're still in the discussion stage, but there is already interest by UN Women, by international NGOs, and I'm going to New York next week, actually, to further develop this campaign, and we've developed the concept note, and now we're discussing and finalizing it, and the implementation program. There will be an international coordination committee, and I think it would be great for Seroptimus International, everywhere to be a part of this. Also, from November onwards, October, November onwards, there will be regional consultations on Beijing Plus 25. So it is important at these regional consultations that are taking place, Bangkok for Asia Pacific, and for Europe, for Americas, for Africa, for the Middle East, they're all taking place between October and November. It is important that women's groups, those of you who are engaged with this process, to bring up the issue of family law, because that demand for change has to come from the ground, has to come from the regions, and then it will be taken, be considered in New York at that level, at that global level. But we're really working very closely with international NGOs, with UN Women, to push on the urgency of family law as part of Beijing Plus 25, as part of SDG, because next year will also be SDG Plus 5 celebration. And the SDG indicator on gender equality has already identified family law reform. A legal framework of equality and justice in family law is one of the 4 legal frameworks that governments need to show progress on. So the platforms are all opening up, and we cannot lose the opportunity for that's opening up in 2020 to push for this.
Fantastic. I believe that we as Seroptimists, we should be part of that platform. And that is where Seroptimists have the greatest voice. I have a question within the Malaysian context. There was a comment that said that within the plural legal system in Malaysia, both civil and Sharia systems, the rights of the non-Muslim women have advanced, while 2 rounds of reform to the Islamic family law has led to increased discrimination against Muslim women. Do you agree with the statement? And can you advise what more can we do to reduce discrimination against our Muslim sisters here?
Yeah, of course. It's ridiculous. And this is what happens within plural legal systems. When culture and religion are used to govern personal status laws of communities. And unfortunately, in Malaysia, the Muslim community is the majority community, and it is this majority community that's being discriminated against in family law, because of the use of religion to justify the discrimination. And so while the personal status law, the family law of non-Muslims have advanced to recognize equality, polygamy has been banned for non-Muslims, equal right to divorce for men and women, equal right to guardianship, equal right to inheritance, but all for non-Muslims. In the name of Islam, Muslim women should be discriminated against. And this is untenable and shameful and disgraceful. It cannot be accepted anymore. And so this is why, the importance of voices. Look, change is not going to come on a silver platter. Okay, why should men in power and authority and privilege who benefit from this ideology of patriarchy and male superiority over women, why would they want their privileges be changed and undermined? They don't want it. So it is important for us as women, as women's rights activists, as women who are sisters of those who are discriminated against, to really speak out and build that momentum and that voice that this discrimination is no longer tenable, that our realities have changed, our lives have changed, and therefore, how women are treated in law also has to change. So I really want to see that solidarity emerging and that global voice and national voice in Malaysia at the national level to have more sisterhood to support the Muslim women's demand for reform.
There's been a lot of questions about how do we get our men to respect our Muslim sisters more, right? And how do we get even our Muslim preachers to come and champion our rights? Is that impossible?
It's tough, but it's possible. I mean, really, in the end, we've got to make it costly for them. Men's bad behavior must be punished, you know. The problem is that, you know, women feel that we have to keep the peace, we have to give in, we have to suffer in silence. Enough is enough. This is why patriarchy still reigns, not just in the Muslim world, in the Western world as well. It's because male bad behavior is rewarded by election to the most powerful, you know, office in the world. You know, this is why, you know, we have this problem. Bad behavior must be punished, you know. And so if your husband doesn't help with the housework, doesn't help with the upbringing of the children, doesn't help, you know, in driving the children over the weekend, piano class, violin class, tuition class, therapy, everything, you just see the mothers running like a chicken without a head, running from one appointment to another. I mean, all of you can empathize with this. You have to put a stop to this and to make demands. You know, men are not going to change of their own, well, few of them, of their own good, you know, there are good men, of course, they know the realities, but there are men who enjoy the freedom they have to play golf, the freedom they have to ride their motorbikes over the weekend with their men friends. Who wants to take your kids from one class after another when you can ride a bicycle and play golf for 5 hours, you know? So it is important that women, especially young women, you know, those of you who have just gotten married or planning to get married, to set very high standards of what you expect in a marriage and what you expect from the men in your life. If you don't set those standards and if you don't punish your husband for falling down on those standards, nothing is going to change. So set high standards, maintain those standards, and you make sure there are consequences when they fall short of those standards that you both have agreed on before you got married. So it's like after you get married, never mind lah, you know, to keep the peace, to keep, you know, the marriage, you know, don't rock the boat, you give in, because that is the path down the hill to a life of enslavement.
Thank you very much, Zaina. It has been enlightening talk, and please give her a round of applause. Thank you very much. Such a motivator. Can I now invite Puasis Yong Analinga, International Convention Chair, to come and give an appreciation gift to Zaina?